All right, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another movie review. And if you saw on the title, the movie is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Now, it says that it was based on the book by Rebecca Skloot, which they talk about her in this movie. The assistant producer, the narrator, and the person in it was Oprah. And before we get into this movie, I just want to say one thing. Well, a couple of things. I had to pause this movie at least 3 times because of the things that I saw. I just can't believe that human beings would do this to other human beings, that Americans would do this to other Americans, that this type of mentality where just because someone is a different race, you could just do whatever you want to do. I don't understand that. I don't understand where your morals are when this happens. And I don't understand why you would be possessed to harm other people and their families. And the second thing I wanted to bring up is that Oprah is a good actress. She plays a lot of roles, not all, but a lot of roles where she's that all my life I had to protect myself type of character. You know what I mean? Like on The Color Purple. And I don't know. I could definitely say that I felt the pain by watching her. But let's get into this. Okay, so I did write some notes down for this review. If you don't want to hear the movie, you want to see it on your own, don't watch this because it's going to be all kinds of spoilers. I'm just letting you know off the bat. It's just what it is. And you already know if it's coming from me. My disclaimer is always in the description box. It is from my point of view, my personal opinion, my non-religious opinion. So if you have a problem with that, you probably don't want to watch either. But let's get to it. Henrietta Lacks, for those of you who don't know. All right, so it had a few places in the movie where you had to read it, and so I'm just going to start out with that. So at the beginning it said, for decades, scientists had been collecting tissue samples from patients without consent, searching for cells that would live outside of the human body. In 1951, a woman entered a hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, and everything changed. Now, even though they put patients at the beginning of the movie, as you go on to continue to watch the movie, they are going to mention the fact that most of the people who were wrongly done were women of color, men of color, black people, okay? Just put it out there. Okay, so let's go on. So, let's see, I think her birthday was August the 1st, 1920, which would have made her 31 when she went into the hospital. Her samples from her tissue was sent all over the world. The family had no clue about it. She didn't know about what was going to happen to her. Nobody knew what happened to her until later on down the line. Now I'm going to show you what happened. So her samples were called HeLa, Hila, which it stood for her name, Henrietta Lacks. Well, because they did these things back then without anyone's permission or letting them know, they decided to basically cancel out who the donor was, even though she wasn't a donor. They stole it from her. Okay. It was a ripoff job. So when asked about who the donor was of these cells that were used everywhere in vaccines. They said they lied at the beginning and said it was Helen Lane. Really? Yeah, they said it was Helen Lane. Okay. So the HeLa samples that were sent all over the world, the first vaccine was on January the 10th, 1955 by Dr. Selks. He had a polio vaccine at Tuskegee. If you haven't done your research, Google Tuskegee experiment and you see that experiments was done on the Tuskegee Airmen in the same place. So when people tell you that their family has a history of the medical fields wrongly doing people of color or minorities, believe it. Look it up, Google it, talk to the elderly, and you'll find out what was going on. But back to this movie, okay? So after they lied and did the Helen Lane and then changed it from Helen Lane to HeLa, which was really for Henrietta Lacks, they sent these samples all over the world. They had the polio vaccine. Other vaccines were made from these cells. After they showed how these cells were taken from her body and sent everywhere, and how people were making money off of them, then it actually went back to the movie, and this is where Oprah comes in. So what happens is there is this writer. The writer's name was Rebecca Skloot. She had told her peers that she wanted to make a book on the story behind Henrietta Lacks, because when she tried to look up information, she couldn't find anything besides that she was a donor. So the writer's thinking that this is a donor and she's going to contact the family and get some background information on Henrietta. So that was how everything got started. Well, when she actually drove down there to meet the family, that's when she learned about everything else. Okay. So when Rebecca got the okay to go down there to talk to the family and everything, she drove and everything. And in Baltimore, 1999, this enters the Oprah character. Henrietta's youngest daughter, who's in her 50s by now, her name was Deborah. Rebecca Skloot was from Portland, and the reason why she was on this case in the first place was because her father had gotten sick and died, and he was in I guess some kind of facility that was supposed to have been helping people, but he was wrongly done, and so that's what made her interested in this. Okay, so she got in contact with Deborah, and she went down there to talk to her and everything. And at first, Deborah was down for it. She wanted to get her, the story out. She also wanted to find out about her mom because she didn't have any way or connections that she needed. So she looked at the writer, Rebecca, as being a way to find out information. Well, Deborah's mother was Henrietta. She died of cervical cancer, and she had left behind 5 children. When Rebecca finally got down there, Deborah was like, I don't think I should talk to you. I think you should talk to my brothers. She said, my brothers told me that you're not going to do anything but hurt me. So Rebecca wound up going to see the brothers first. And the brothers talked to her a little bit about the mom, but basically it was coming to a dead end. And so when Rebecca went back to her room, that's when she got the phone call from Deborah, and Deborah decided to go ahead and help her any way that she could for this book. Okay, so in this movie, it goes kind of back and forth from, the olden days and then back up to the, present when they were trying to get the information. During the flashback part, they showed how after the mother had died, after Henrietta died, the doctors, repeatedly got the children in there, drawing blood from them, taking tests on them, and they told them that they were checking for cancer, which Rebecca found out that all of that was a lie. They weren't checking for cancer. They was basically checking to see if the children had the same type of blood and cells as the mom. Now, my thing is, it didn't turn out to be that way, but what if it had? Were you going to lie and say that these children had cancer to do experiments on them as well? That's just something that I was thinking about when I was watching this movie. Like, they were showing them, sticking the needles in there and drawing them and told them, oh, it's to check for cancer. And that turned out to be a lie. Then after talking to the family members, which were, a few of the brothers and then Deborah, Rebecca found out that the doctors had basically lied about everything. They didn't tell them anything, what was wrong with the mother besides the cancer. They didn't tell about the tests that they did. They didn't tell that they sent her samples all over the world. They didn't tell that it was used in other vaccines that helped other people. They didn't tell them anything. Not only did they not tell them that they were doing this, but the family got no compensation for anything. Now, this is back in the day. They didn't have like a donor card. Henrietta never gave her permission for them to do any of this. They just felt it was their job to do it on their own because she was a minority, because she was a woman. You know what I mean? People all over the world had benefited from this lady's sales, and her family didn't even benefit from it. Now, I want you to think about that. Because as the movie goes on, they do talk about certain ailments that the brothers wound up having, and they weren't helped in any type of way. Not with doctors, not with medical, procedures that they needed done, not with money, any type of compensation, nothing. These people got nothing for what was done to them as a family. Now, as the Oprah character comes in, her name was Deborah. They kind of like give you a picture of how Deborah's mentality is. Deborah has this worn face, gray hair, walks around, with a cane because I guess she had an ailment or whatever. She wasn't really overweight. She was just walked around with a cane. She had a limp. She had this lanyard. The lanyard was WWJD. What would Jesus do? So right off the bat, you notice this is somebody who was in the church like the rest of the family. Which there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes when you have that type of mentality, we'll get to that. That part is coming up. Trust me, it's coming up. Okay. So, they show you this picture of the youngest daughter looking like this. And then, some of the brothers. And They get into like the background story. One of the brothers had been in prison. Actually, it was only one that had been in prison. And you'll find out about that later on too. Um, Deborah, she had mental problems, but that didn't come up until like the middle of the movie, where she had been so heartbroken over her mother and trying to find information and couldn't, that she calls it lost her nerves. That's what, Deborah herself said it. But she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and had panic attacks and things like that. And that's going to be important to remember later on too. But let's keep going. So the first not confrontation, but the first meeting that Rebecca had with Deborah, you saw how, Deborah was dressed and everything. And Rebecca wanted to give her a present. So she opened up the trunk of her car and she showed her this painting. It was like a picture, but it was blown up in a picture frame, a painting. And it was her mother's cells. And they were, enlarged in different colors and everything. And it was pretty. It was a pretty picture. And so Deborah was really happy to get that and thanked her and shook her hand and everything. That's when she told her that with the help of her mother's cells, there was some of the things that her cells were used in was for in vitro fertilization, AIDS cocktail, chemotherapy drugs. She explained to her that people all over the world had benefited from the contributions of her mother. Now, mind you, this is before she found out that the family got nothing and was told nothing about this. So when she told her these things, Deborah was like, really? I didn't know all of that happened with my mom's cells. Then you started getting introduced to other people in the family. Sadie was Henrietta's cousin, and Gladys was Henrietta's sister. So when the Rebecca and Deborah went to see the other family members, they let me get this right. Rebecca had her little tape recorder and she asked them, the cousin and sister, to tell them a little bit about Henrietta. They described Henrietta as being, this nice, slender black lady. They said she had a beautiful face. The other cousins were like she had the best set of teeth you ever seen. So when they showed this character on there, she had this big smile with these big pretty teeth. And I was like, wow. I don't know where they found the actress, but it was a nice actress. So yeah, they, as they were describing how Henrietta looked, and they had this lady smiling and, dressed, back then in the 50s and things like that. So yeah, and they talked about how she was very religious. She had an open heart. She cooked for strangers. She had a long line of people where she cooked for. She kept her hair and nails done. So they gave this nice picture of the character of Henrietta. You know what I mean? So you got to know not only how she looked on the outside, but that she was just as beautiful on the inside. When Henrietta got sick, she had touched so many people that there was literally a line of donors to give blood on the behalf of Henrietta. And I thought that was like a nice gesture to show you how many people she touched. So then they get into the children of Henrietta, which Deborah was one of them. Rebecca starts asking about the other children. Henrietta had another daughter named Eliza Pleasant, who had died at 4. So she would have been the older sister of Deborah. Um, After they talked about the other children, Rebecca went to the hospital, Johns Hopkins University, and she asked the director, she was like, "Did you know that the family didn't know about the cells and they were only told it was cancer?" She was just like, trying to touch bases with him, asking him, was he aware of this? And his response was so racist, so racist. He said, well, back then, they probably didn't go into detail because these type of people probably wouldn't have understood anyway. So when you say these type of people, are you meaning black people? Are you meaning poor people? Are you meaning poor black people? Do you think they don't know how to read? Are you meaning uneducated? I'm just really trying to get to the core of this. What did you mean when you said that? But we already know what the mentality was back then. Second class citizens, African Americans, they could just do what they want to do, including steal your cells. Matter of fact, in the movie, they said that the older people, and the grandparents and things, would tell the kids, you better behave or else we going to send you to Hopkins. Because Hopkins was known for killing off minorities, doing experiments for a lot of tragic things. And so that was one of the threats. You better behave or we're going to send you to Hopkins. Can you imagine living in an area where that's being said? Now, if that surprises you to hear that about Baltimore, Maryland, I just want you to know that almost every state in the United States has some place where people say that about a particular hospital. Where I grew up, I was born and raised in Gary, Indiana, and we had a place like that too. It was in downtown Gary. It was Methodist. You did not want to be sent to Methodist. They said all the same things in Methodist. When I lived in Tennessee, there's a particular hospital in Nashville called General. You didn't want to go to General Hospital. General Hospital was known for not having the up-to-date things. And more than likely, something was going to go wrong. And they were going to just be like, oh, well, complications. So you just didn't go to those type of hospitals. Now, back then in the 50s, 60s, what have you, 40s, a lot of people didn't have a choice of which hospital to go to like we do now. So imagine being in a place where that's your hospital, your only place to go, and that's the reputation. Just imagine that. But this is what they lived through back then. Let me push pause. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. I had to answer the door. I hate when people interrupt me when I'm recording. I really do. But I had to answer the door. So let's get back to what I was saying about how the medical field has been doing minorities wrong for years, 20s, 30s, 40s. And here's the thing. People always want to be like, oh, well, that was back then when they said stay away from those type of hospitals, or this is the type of thing that happened. No. Racism is still going on now in every aspect of life, from police to the teachers to the medical field. If anything that we learned in 2020, we learned that there were a massive amount of nurses on social media saying the most repulsive things, the most deplorable things, and it was racist. So that just lets you know it hasn't gone anywhere. How can black people, minorities trust the people in the medical fields when you allow this stuff to go on? It's right up under your nose. It's not like you don't know. You know. And if you don't know, how are you dealing with it? How are you going to deal with it? Because there are a lot of things that needs to be for all. Medical for all, medical insurance for all. That should be what's going on here for the American citizens, just like what's going on in other countries. But we're not going to get into that. We're not going to get into that. But I'm just saying, when it comes to black people and the medical, you really can't blame them for how they feel about the medical. Between the gynecologists in slavery times and the Tuskegee experiments, and then Henrietta Lacks, and then back Sarah Bartman. If you don't know about her, you could Google that as well. And then the things that have been said on social media in 2020. There have been a lot of black women who have literally lost their lives during childbirth. There have been incidences where black women have went to hospitals or doctors and complained about pains, and they were ignored. Or people, the medical society, the medical field views black people as being able to tolerate more pain. I'm not understanding how pigment in skin makes it so that you can tolerate pain. It's just a shade. But the bad part is, I would like to see more blacks and minorities get into a place where they do trust the medical field, because there are a lot of breakthroughs going on all the time. And I understand that some of that reason is not only because of the past that the medical profession has done to them, but also the future where it's not affordable for everybody. Which is why a lot of people in different cultures and of different minorities, they will go to holistic practices as a means of healing. Is there anything wrong with that? A lot of it is just you giving up your money and you're hoping for the best. That's what a lot of it is. I'm not going to say don't try the holistic approaches. I've done it. Did it work? Yeah, it subsided a lot of the stuff. But when it came down to it, and you had to get rid of a flu or a cold so you could get back to work, more than likely you wound up going to the drugstore getting something. Let's get back to the movie. All right, so getting back to Henrietta's kids, because we know it was 5 of them. I think 2 or 3 was at the house with the aunt and the cousin, and then it was Deborah. Sorry. And so from what I understand, Deborah was the only girl, or one of the only girls. There was another daughter who had died at the age of 15. Her name was Elsie Lacks. Elsie Lacks died at 15. She was in a mental institution. Now, the family knew about the daughter who had died, but they didn't know that she died in the mental institution itself. They just assumed it was at a hospital or something. Now, the reason why that daughter was in the mental institution is because uh, back then they didn't have the capabilities of taking care of children with disabilities or mental disabilities. And so the daughter, she didn't speak. She had problems basically doing a lot of things. Like one of the incidences the cousin had said was that Elsie was found in the middle of the street in traffic, and nobody had known she had gotten out there. And Henrietta tried so hard to get her daughter help, but she was really going to the wrong places. You know, back then they had like what they had called tent revival services. And so Henrietta would go around taking her daughter to service after service after service, trying to get her healed, and nothing ever worked. The Henrietta's sisters, not sister, the cousin said that she took that girl to 7 religious tents, 7 tents, trying to get her healed, and it didn't work. And so the last result was to take her to the mental institution, and she was told that they were going to try to help her to speak. Now, my thing is, we all know from experiences and things like that these faith healers are false frauds, have people working on the inside, have people in the audience pretending like they have ailments when they didn't. So for back then, Henrietta to go to 7 different places, give her money, trying to desperately find help and healing for her daughter, I just can't. This is why me and other people say that religion harms more than it helps. Because she's been indoctrinated with this thing that somebody's going to help you. And she's going on faith, which means having faith basically means when you don't have proof, you have to have faith. You don't have proof. You don't have proof. There's no way to prove it. So anyway, getting back to the movie. When Deborah found out that her sister had died in the mental institution, it really, took a toll off of her. She was crying and everything, and I was upset. She yelled at the writer at this particular time because, Rebecca, she still had the little recorder everywhere they were going, back and forth between these places, to the hospital, to the, not the hospital, but the research center and all these other places. She had her tape recorder. And Deborah started yelling at her, and she said, my sister should have never been in that place and died alone. I could just see her in there by herself crying, not knowing that mama would never come back. And then she just started, yelling at her, and she shook her and stuff. And she said, my oldest brother, okay, let me go back some. So after Deborah found out about her sister, they went to this it's like a cabin. They had drove to this cabin. She was trying to show Rebecca the cabin. The cabin was basically a home that they had in slavery, and nobody had torn it down. So they went to the cabin and it started raining. And so that's when Deborah told Rebecca that her sister shouldn't have died by herself, and it was tragic, and she didn't know that her mama wasn't coming back. And then she just started going off and yelling and screaming, and she was like, no, I just can't take it no more. And then she just spilled everything. She talked about how her oldest brother, the one that had went to prison, she was like, they just think he went in prison for no reason. That's not what happened. And then she described, when they were little, after Henrietta had died, they went to some relatives, evil aunt. She called her the evil aunt. They went to the evil aunt and her husband, and the evil aunt beat all of them on a regular basis, would wake them up out of their sleep. She would especially beat the oldest boy, I guess because he was the oldest. And she would rip his shirt off, make him stand in the corner, and take a stick, it looked like a whip, and would beat him on the back with it. And he had marks all over his back. And so Deborah was saying that they beat him until he didn't feel anything. And so that's why he started getting older and angrier. The older he got, the angrier he got. And then Deborah started talking about an incident where y'all know this is trigger for me. A trigger. Because they kind of show, how they do flickers of memory. So Deborah said that we all got beat, and we got beat all times of night and stuff. And then when I was 15, and then she started crying and screaming. Well, come to find out, when she was 15, the aunt's husband had raped her. And she broke free and ran. She ran to another relative's house. And when that relative found out what happened, she grabbed her bat and went back to that house. And she threatened them, both of them, the evil aunt and her husband. Said, if you ever put your hands on any of these children ever again, I will beat you with this bat. Don't come here. Don't talk to us. Any of that. And she took the kids and she took them with her. But mind you, Henrietta died when Deborah was 2. This incident happened when she was 15. So that's like 13 years with the evil aunt and those kids getting beat and nobody knew about it. That's some trauma for you. Trauma and no therapy. But you know what they used in replace of therapy? The Bible. You need therapy for trauma. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Let's go on with the movie. So when they was at the cabin and it was raining and she told Rebecca about all the stuff that happened to them, she went into a tangent. I'm talking about Rebecca was like, what's wrong? And Deborah's skin was breaking out. She was pacing back and forth. She was screaming. She was rocking. Like I said, it was the same character from Color Purple. She was rocking. I can't take it anymore. What they did to my mama. What they did to my sister. Because I did mention, and when they finally got the records on the sister and how she had died in the mental institution, her records, number one, they didn't know they was going to find her records. They told her the name. They found the records. Um, when they were showed the folder, her record was the only one that had pictures, and those pictures were horrible. That little girl didn't even look like a little girl. I don't know what they had done, but amongst other things, her face was unrecognizable. They had did shock therapy to her. When they read the records, they found out that they did some kind of experiment where they drilled a hole in her skull. It was horrible. And the director of the institute, he tried to the director of the mental institution tried to stop them from getting the records. And Deborah said, "This is my sister, and I'm so and so," and she had power of attorney papers. And she said, "I want you to get every one of these pictures and files and give them to me because I'm taking them with me." Now, on that, I was like, "You go, girl." Because she came in there with that power of attorney, they couldn't do nothing but give it to her. Had she not had it, they would have escorted her up out of there. And it would have been her word against theirs, and they probably would have got rid of those pictures. I promise you that. But anyway, so Deborah goes into this rant. Rebecca's watching her with her eyes all big, and she's, what they did to my mama, what they did. And so they drive over to the brother's house with the other families. And Deborah's screaming and hollering and yelling, and her brother grabs her by the shoulder and says, "Hopkins did this to us. It's no use of you getting upset and hurt over something that you can't do anything about. It's in God's hands." How many people do you know? Now, I'm not talking about me because I know some too. Have said this phrase instead of getting legal help, instead of suing, instead of doing the things that you need to do to protect you and your family. How many people have used this? It's in God's hands. Leave it in God's hands. Where was God at when this was happening to all of them? He was watching, then that's cruel. He wasn't intervening or any of that. It was allowed to happen. Now, if you have this Bible that says that it's okay to abuse women, kidnap them, tell them they're not supposed to speak, slavery, if you beat him and he gets up within a day, there's no charges. If he doesn't get up, and this, and that, and the other. It tells you how it's supposed to be done, when. They even have a slavery Bible. Google it. And you still looking towards this as an answer to what you need. The slave master looking at this Bible to keep your ass ignorant, and you look into it as if you're going to get saved. One of y'all ain't going to get answered. And from the looks of it, it's you. So anyway, the brother shakes her and says that, puts his hand on her and says, "Get out, get this negative energy out of her, get it out of her soul. She's a broken vessel," and all of this stuff. Then they start screaming and hugging and crying together. And then in this movie, then they have Deborah stop crying. Now, we already know she has schizophrenia. I feel like to indoctrinate somebody that already has a mental unawareness, who's not able to tell between what's literal and what's not literal, is just horrible. To have this movie portray this is horrible. You could have had a whole movie without this bullshit. You already said that when she went from tent to tent with the other daughter, it didn't help. But you want to put your hand on her and then she stops crying. So then after that, Deborah and Rebecca get in the car and everything, it's still raining, and they go home. And then the next day, it's some more indoctrination plug in. Because the next day, Rebecca goes back to the brother's house. And then she says, well, how were you able to say those words to her? And then she calmed down. He hands her this Bible because he was on the porch reading it. He hands her the Bible, tells her to read it, tells her to read it out loud. She reads the verse that says, those who believe in me will live, and those who don't. And then he says Henrietta was chosen by God. Instead of you suing this hospital for doing damages and doing what they did to your mother, you would rather believe she was chosen by God, and this is what happened. They stole parts of her body without permission. And you want to say it's all God's work. This kind of religion makes it so that anything that you deem that you can't deal with, you just say it's God. God of the gaps fallacy. You just plug in God. When you should have been trying to proceed with law against this hospital, against these people. Even if it was out of limits for, how long, something still could have been done. Something could have been done. Let's go on. So, let me get to the next part. In the next scene, the writer takes Deborah to Hopkins. Now, mind you, she was scared to go to Hopkins because of all she heard, when she was a child and everything, and then what happened to her mom. So, Rebecca took Deborah to the Hopkins. As soon as they walk in the door, she sees this big statue of white Jesus looking down at her, and she goes to touch the feet of the statue. Ever since slavery times, black people have been taught to see white as clean and holy and a savior, and to look at themselves as less than. It's indoctrination. And the indoctrination passes on from generation to generation. The best pyramid scheme ever to pass on to your children and your children and your children to make it continue going. As a black person from slavery times, coming to a world where nobody looks like them, with a language that's not theirs, they take your name, give them one of their names. They split you apart from their family. They tell you everything about yourself is wrong or ugly. All the forefathers are white. All the people or characters in this Bible are white or not black, shall I say. All of back then, when you go from slavery on up to like 40s, 50s, on TV weren't any black people. When you get to the 60s or 50s, black people were maids, cooks, worked on the boats. Remember when Malcolm X said, "Who taught you to hate everything about you from the top of your head to the soles of your feet?" Well, you already know where it came from. And religion is not any different. In 2021, people are still hating themselves, and they're keeping the faith in invisible deities, not taking charge of your own life. Like I said earlier, instead of them trying to make right and pursue what was wrong to their mother, they want to say, leave it in God's hands. If you don't take care of yourself, who's going to do it? You have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your family. You have to do what needs to be done. By you waiting on an invisible deity to come, you're going to be waiting forever. So anyway, back to the movie. After Rebecca and Deborah get there to Hopkins University, Rebecca says, this is my friend Christoph, and they shake hands. Deborah and Christoph shake hands. As they're shaking hands, Deborah's brother comes in. The one who had been in prison, the taller one. He comes in. He was the main one who was against all of this at the beginning. I guess he had a change of heart. So Christoph, introduces himself and everything. And he says, follow me. So they all go and they follow him. Christoph takes them into this lab and tells them, this is your mother's cells. And he has this freezer with this, it's like a container type of thing, but it's cold. And so he lifts it up, and all of these vials are in there all the way down. And he takes out one vial and, warms it up and hands it to Deborah. And Deborah looks at it like this. And she's just like looking at it because in her mind, it's like, this is mama. So she looks at the vial. The brother looks at the vial. Christoph hands them a microscope, and they're able to look at it under the microscope. And they started, oh, look at her. Because, the cells were moving and everything. And then the brother was like, let me see, let me see. And so Deborah let him see. And so Christoph does something for them. He turns the light off and puts it on a big screen, which is, covers like the front of the room. And they're able to see the cells moving on the big screen, on the projector. And so they started, crying and everything and looking. And that was nice. After all of this happens, they go back to the car, and Deborah takes the painting that Rebecca had given her of the cells and gives it to her brother. And the brother, he cries and gives Deborah a kiss on the cheek and says thank you. Because at the beginning of the movie, they said that he was the only one who actually remembered being there when the mother died. Like he was 10 or something like that. Yeah, he was the oldest. So, yeah, that was really nice. The next scene after this, after they go home, the writer calls Deborah on the phone to give her the good news about the book. Keeps getting a voicemail. Calls again, keeps getting a voicemail. After the third call, she calls one of the other family members and said, Deborah's not answering the phone. I wanted to tell her, about the book and stuff. Call me when you get this message. I guess I don't have to tell you, but Deborah had died. So I'm going to read to you what it said at the end. It said that Deborah died in her sleep May 12th, 2009, 9 months before the book was published. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot was on the New York Times bestseller list for 6 years in a row. Rebecca Skloot established the Henrietta Lacks Foundation in 2010. Now I'm going to stop there before I finish the last sentences. What Rebecca did is what the family should have been doing instead of leaving it in God's hands. I'm wondering, seriously wondering, if Rebecca gave them the proceeds from that bestseller being on there for 6 years. I wonder, did she add their name to the foundation? It doesn't say anything about that. I might have to do some research on that to see. The last two paragraphs on that movie said that patient consent is still not required for research on human tissues obtained during medical treatment if the donor identity is removed. Now, mind you, Rebecca was never a donor in the first place. And it did have donor in quotes in that paragraph. The final paragraph said the Lacks family never received compensation for the use of Henrietta's cells. So you got polio vaccines, you got AIDS cocktails, tuberculosis treatments, in vitro. You got all of this stuff that went on. All of these people were saved, and the family got nothing. You have this writer who wrote this book. I just don't understand this. How would I rate the movie? Between would you get popcorn or between would you get popcorn or get a drink? You need a drink. You definitely need a drink. We'll say 1 out of 5, 5 being the highest. We'll do 3.5. How about that? 3.5. Okay, we can push it to a 4. Because it caught my attention, I tell you that right now. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions about the movie, leave it down below. You know what to do. Don't forget to subscribe and share. And until next time, next movie review, stay happy.